So welcome to the Nigerian Startup Build Learning Series. So the theme of today's session is the Nigerian Startup Build, a model for effective government startup collaboration. But to join me in this panel session, I would invite some amazing persons. So I would like to invite Adaeze Sokan. Please let's keep clapping till she gets to the stage. Thank you. Next up, I would like to invite Oswald, Osaretin, Gubadia. Please let's keep clapping. Thank you. Great. Next to join me for this interesting session is Kasim Sodangi. Please let's keep clapping. Thank you. And next is Nkechi Oguchi. Yes, please let's keep clapping. Thank you. Great. So before we start, I would like to give our interesting panelists 2 minutes each to introduce themselves and tell us about what they do. So I'll start with Nkechi.
Thank you very much. My name is Nkechi. I'm the CEO of Ventures Park, and we support startups through access to basic infrastructure that they need, like a workspace to work out of, electricity, good connectivity to build their great ideas. And we have a community of founders that, help support each other, collaborate, and work together to build amazing solutions. Ventures Park is part of a larger Ventures platform family, and there we provide funding to different startups. We've funded startups like Paystack, PiggyVest, and the likes. And we also have our foundation that designs programs that help upskill people to build great solutions as well.
Thank you.
Hi. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Oswald Osaretin Gobadia. I'm the Senior Special Assistant to the President for Digital Transformation and the lead for the Nigerian Startup Bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Adaeze Sokan, and I'm the Country Director for the UK Nigeria Tech Hub. So the UK Nigeria Tech Hub is an initiative of the UK government to build sustainable digital ecosystems in Nigeria, and that entails supporting high-end digital skills, that's advanced talent, supporting the growth of the startup ecosystem. One of the initiatives under that we're supporting is the Nigeria Startup Bill, something we're really, really proud of. And lastly, facilitating linkages between Nigeria and the UK. So really happy to be here.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kasim Sodangi. I am the head of legal and compliance for Smile Identity Limited. Smile Identity is a startup that enables digital KYC for fintechs, for banks, and all platforms that need to prove or authenticate or verify identity, within the economies in Africa. So I lead the compliance team for Smile Identity, and I also co-chair the drafting team of the Nigerian Startup Bill. Thank you.
Thank you. So you can see we have amazing speakers on this panel. Before I go straight to the questions, please, can we move forward? Thank you. So Oswald, this is for you. Looking at Nigeria over the last 5 years, How applicable has government startup collaboration as a model been effective and efficient?
So I think the proof is in the pudding, right? So over the last couple of years, we've had a number of situations where it's obvious that there's a misalignment between what the regulation wants and what the innovative bodies want to do. And that's one of the reasons why we started this program of developing a bill that provides a platform for both parties to meet to help create an environment that we can innovate and as well regulate for full efficiency. But to answer your question more directly, I would say over the last 5 years, we've had a lot of mismatched situations where we have value creators and regulations that actually may miss the mark, or the actual innovators were operating sort of in the dark or in ignorance of what the actual regulations were. So the idea is to bring light into that situation and ultimately have both parties at the table.
Okay, thank you, Oswald. Nkechi, I'll be interested to know what you have to add to that question, knowing that VentureSpark has actually done a lot of things with government over the past 5 years, especially with this present government. So what's your thought on the question?
So we have engaged a lot with the government. The vice president even visited our hub. There's been a lot of activities from what I've seen. But in terms of actual changes, I think the ecosystem has been the one championing a lot of this, sometimes through dialogue on social media, trying to make the government aware of certain things and issues that they are facing. But I see a willingness on the government's part to engage. And even in Ventures Platform Foundation, we had designed an ecosystem dialogue series to enable the government and startup founders to get together and to actually understand each other. So for the founders to understand the part of regulation and policies, and for the policymakers to also understand the context of the founders. So there's been a lot of dialogue happening, a lot of conversation, which I think is one of the early things that should be done. And this should hopefully translate to actions. So where we're lacking now is in some of the actions. I know if there's a government person, they will defend that they've done a lot of work. Yes, we hear it.
To defend that. Oswald wants to defend that.
Yeah, they'll defend it. But, take it down to the very grassroots. Like, how has the people actually building the solution, how has their lives changed? How has their businesses changed? Do they find the environment to be more favorable? We interact with them a lot, and their response is usually a little negative. So I'm hoping that more of these things will translate to actions.
Yeah, I believe so. Also, this is here, and we believe that too. Okay, so our next question is, how can the government leverage solutions from startups to function more effectively? Kasim.
That's a very interesting question. I was part hoping you wouldn't ask me, and hoping you would. And I'll tell you why. So before joining Smile, I was the acting national coordinator for the Office for Digital Innovation. Big title, now for the government. But the truth is, and this is why the startup bill is important, the government foundationally on the documents and the legal framework that holds the government together did not and does not contemplate working with startups and innovation, unfortunately. Yeah. You'll find out there are tons of fits and starts for projects that are driven with technology. It's still called ICT, by the way, And ICT is looked upon within government as some secretarial service, computers, internet, sending mails, and files. And so, one of the things the startup bill does is that it creates a legal framework so that the government can, it's like, when you have systems and it's not in ones and zeros, it can't read it, So there's that misalignment between what the ecosystem is saying and how the government is designed. You see, we did borrow our models from the colonial 1930s models of public service. They went millions of years ahead and reformed theirs. We're still stuck. We still have to do paper files. So I'll give an example. Within Nigeria's government today, a file has to be in paper to be recognized as a file. So where do you start? However, if you do some maturation type analysis, you find out that many MDAs are far along in being able to implement, just either from the independence they have from their statutory documents like the central bank, like the PENCOM, and than a ministry of maybe education, for instance. So it means that we can approach it in a sort of segmentation. You can segment it and approach big partnerships and innovation and so on. But it means that for the whole of government approach, more work needs to be done to deal with the foundational elements. And that's why the startup bill is such an exemplary model, because you would have the opportunity, and I'm sure some of the people on this panel will speak to just the kinds of things that the document will do to enable that type of, I hope I haven't said too much.
No, you haven't.
So, yeah.
And that's quite true. I could see Adaeze nodding her head to it. And I just wanted to also hear your thoughts, being that prior to joining the UK-Nigeria Hub, you were also at Ventures Platform. So I would want to know, what are your thoughts on also the above questions?
Yeah, really powerful. I think this actually means, I think government needs to see, and the ecosystem, right? Oz used to say, who's government? So so government is all of us. So when I say government, I'm referring to our policymakers, our political leaders, right? Need to see the startup ecosystem as a business contract or like a partnership. And in every partnership agreement or business agreement, there is win-win, right? You do something for me, I do something for you. And if you look back in other thriving economies, like Silicon Valley, for example, how it started and how the economy became what it is today, it was that kind of trust and agreement. It wasn't necessarily all planned out and strategized. It just sort of happened. The Ministry of Defense at the time needed to go to war, and you had a bunch of young people at Stanford coming up with technologies to power communication during the war. If you even move further down in Rwanda, the whole government working with Zipline to deliver health services in Rwanda. And what was even happening in Senegal with COVID and government. So I think that this thinking about answering that question is, can we begin to look at this as an agreement? What do I want? Government wants a better economy, innovation, protecting the consumer. Startups want to deliver services and build sustainable businesses. And how can we work together to do that? And how can we build trust? So if we have that agreement and everybody plays their part, then we are not only building trust, but we are also building the foundations for a thriving economy.
Thank you, Adaeze. It's good you mentioned it and you saying trust, because the next question we're going to Nkechi, and I know one of the things is there's this kind of gap, it's government and it's the ecosystem. So I think there's this divide. This is government, this is the ecosystem, and it would be interesting to find out how that trust will play out over time. So Nkechi, I would like to ask, what values will startup be looking at in a government-startup collaboration, and what are they willing to give in return?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
What values will startups be looking at in a government-startup collaboration, and what are they willing to give in return?
Wow. So most startups, what they would be looking at, to be honest, is for the government to create an enabling environment for them to do their business. I mean, the very least, you should not raise funding and start a logistic business and then have the government put some kind of licensing fee of 20 million naira that you begin to wonder, you're just trying to bootstrap and manage yourself. So in the very least, an enabling environment, and that means that regulatory frameworks need to understand the context of business. It's normal at this point that the government is trying to play catch up because innovation moves very quickly. So it's normal in every developing nation that that happens. Other things that would be very useful is even when the government are looking for partners to deliver on contracts, they should create systems and criteria that make it easy for startups to qualify. A lot of startups don't qualify for those things, and that is, being able to deal with the government as a client. The government makes pretty decent clients if startups are able to get them. So making sure that the criteria are also startup friendly, as well. And then I think it then goes sector by sector, different sectors, and seeing, okay, as the Ministry of Agriculture, how do you support agri-tech startups and, things along that line. But in setting up good regulation and in looking for better ways to partner so that the government can deal better with startups.
So what do you think the startups will give in return? So should we have all this in place?
So the startups in return one of the most important things is that they could be great revenue for the government. Yeah. The more startups grow and the more they're able to earn, those taxes will come back to the government as revenue. Right now, Nigeria depends so much on oil, and I know that even in looking at the proportions, I think ICT, as they call it, it delivers great revenue for the government, but oil is still our primary source of even foreign exchange and the rest. But in being able to generate revenue from those startups is important. The other one is the startups provide valuable solutions to the problems that we face in the country. So that solution, we're complaining that people don't have access to financial services. Some startups can solve that. People don't have access to food. Some startups can solve that. So that solution will generally improve the well-being of the nation.
Thank you. So it's interesting you brought this up, and I know I was in a conversation where it was said tech is like the new oil. So I think with that being said, it's like you have to support the startups so that this new oil would also favor the government. Oswald, I would like to ask, in the long term, the ease of doing business in Nigeria is projected to trend around 133 in 2021 and 135 in 2022, according to Trade Economics. How can an effective government startup collaboration address this challenge?
So I think, like Adaeze just said, something I normally say when I say who's the government, right? As in, you're the government, we are the government. The same thing sort of applies to when we say tech ecosystem. And I think in our heads, we always think it's just the practitioners that's the tech ecosystem. Yeah. We want people to start thinking that the tech ecosystem has two sides to it. One being the practitioners, and the other side being the regulators and the policy makers coming together and creating an enabling environment together. And both sides continue to educate each other on what is required to create this environment, where there's a balance for both sides, right? Win-win, as was just said here, and what the give backs, as you just asked a few minutes, back to the state, not necessarily government, right? What does the state get back from providing these services? And your question now is speaks specifically to the services themselves, right? And these are the type of things we're trying to address with the bill, right? So trying to make these services that makes doing business in Nigeria a lot easier, makes doing business in Nigeria a lot more attractive. And that ultimately comes from an understanding of what the businesses require to succeed and be able to survive and thrive and do some of the very basic things, right? Anybody who's running a business in Nigeria knows that some of the basic things can be made difficult. And we're trying to create an environment where those things are eased out, and you can now spend more of your cycles thinking about your business as opposed to a registration or a form or access to grants and so forth. The bill itself has the idea of I'm trying not to say one-stop shop anymore, but more so a startup management system, which gives a platform for any startup to plug into it. And once you have a sense of, once you qualify, once you qualify, you now have access to a number of information, access to a number of agencies that may be difficult to get into. So if you're trying to do your pension stuff, or you're trying to do, registrations, name registrations, or a number of things you're trying to register as patent registrations, you have access to it. You also have access to grants and a number of things that are out there, because there's a lot of things that are out there from an incentives perspective, but a lot of people just don't know about them. So this also creates information parity where you have access to information, which is key for any business. Knowing that something that's designed for you actually exists is one of the biggest problems. So I think once you start, lack of better words, bulldozing through these somewhat issues, that would directly address your question on how do we improve our ease of doing business, right? So that's is one of the key things that we're trying to achieve with this bill, ultimately by making Nigeria a go-to location for startups.
Thank you. I think I like that word, bulldozing through these challenges, and I hope that works too. That's going to be my new word. Adaeze, as a support organization, how best do you think government and startups can work together to create a thriving economy?
There are three ways. I already mentioned the first one, which is trust. Trust means if I said I was going to do this, then I'll do it. And this is both on the startup side and on the government side. So if we're saying from your previous question, how do we get the ease of doing business index, how do we come up? And that could be a point of collaboration. And government and everybody wants to be up with the ease of doing business. And we say if we take one example, which is the ease of registration, which is one of the indicators for an environment that has a good ease of doing business. In the bill, I know we say once, why do we keep calling it one-stop shop? But yeah, so there's that management system that makes it easy for people to acquire licenses and registration. So if we sign that into law, everybody has to play their part. Government has to make sure that we abide by the law and the policies that we set to ensure that registration is easier. Startups have to comply with the law. And that way, if we work together, then we can achieve that result. So there's that trust, which doesn't come by just talking on both ends. We have to stop paying lip service and actually act. The second step is the big tent approach. And I'm sure we keep hearing it. We heard in the last panel from Ife, and I think it was us that coined this. The big tent approach is this form of collaboration. Very early on, as we set about this process, we knew that there was no way this bill could pass without everybody being involved. Every key stakeholder was mapped out, and there was a Presidential Strategic Advisory Group which had representation of every stakeholder to think through the entire process, to map out a vision which was to pass this bill. And not just to pass any bill, it was to pass a bill that was co-created by everyone and a bill that will work to deliver the outcomes that everybody wants. So we came together, every key representative, created a plan of action. Everybody had a responsibility, right, from the drafting of the bill to engaging everybody, all the key stakeholders at the different geopolitical zones and even at state levels. If you go on the startupbill.ng website, you can follow all the events. And there was accountability. So every month, people had day jobs, and this was a night job, and everybody was working round the clock to meet with the plan. So I think this big tent approach is a model for policy formulation and implementation. And it's one that says it's not just policymakers or startups, it's everybody coming together to co-create and say what policies will work for the ecosystem. And we want to be able to say this big tent approach, let's replicate it, not just even with the bill, with the passing of the bill, with the implementation of the bill. You even find in the bill a governance structure that almost mirrors this big tent approach, right? And carrying that process even at the state level, where we also intend that the bill will be replicated and operationalized. So there is the trust, and there is the big tent approach. And then lastly is also that business contract, where we continue to say, it was at the NESG summit where somebody was saying that as a government we needed like $1 trillion. And one of the panelists actually said, the private sector can actually deliver if government gives the policy and enabling environment and they bring their infrastructure and there's that sit down, let's talk, and everybody does their part. Then we should be able to deliver the type of result. So big tent approach, seeing it as a business agreement and a contract and trust, could be a model that can be adapted in our context, learning from the Nigerian Startup Bill?
That's interesting. I think one thing that just keeps going through my mind is how do we get to that point where trust is built? I think it's just a question for everybody. I'll go over to Kasim. So the question is, do you perceive an upside in better collaboration between government and startup based on the startup bill? Also leveraging on what Adaeze just said.
Absolutely. There is completely an upside. It's really hard to see the downsides even. There are concerns from the perspective of government about startups. You know, from some quarters, there are concerns, and I'm starting with the negative so that we can quickly dispel them and, you know, that there will be this leakage of revenue, you know, because some companies are going to run around and not be paid. There are also genuine concern about how do these people operate. You know, and there's a major problem on the part of government on, you know, the rules that guide procurement. For instance, Nkechi touched on that. You know, how do I give these people jobs? They don't have the share offices in the first place. Yeah. Who do I arrest? You know, if it goes bad. You know, there are other kinds. They look too young. You know, there's a huge cultural and psyche. You know, these are things that it's easy to wonder why, right? But if you sit down within the rooms of government, you really just wonder where our education system lost it and when, you know. So sometimes I say, when they say Nigeria had, you know, those glorious days of education, I say, when was that, really? Because the people I work with, you know, when I used to be in government. So the question is, how do we drive this cultural, this complete review of thoughts, of ideas? First is that, like I mentioned, the startup bill, you need to rework the law, you know, some aspects of the law, so that you create even an aspect of contract, you know, Adaeze also touched on. Create even the basis for the relationship, the contractual comforts, because the guys in government sometimes are genuinely apprehensive. Don't forget also that every time there's a genuine effort, there are also posers and wannabes, right? So some of them have also been beaten. You know, you have these 2-3 boys. Somebody brings his cousin and his cousin's friend, and they call them a startup, and they give them a project. And 2 years down the line, one is doing master somewhere, one is married and has moved to Canada. You know, these things are familiar. And they say, oh, so what has happened to our project? But the issue is, so there's a definition problem. There's an understanding more than the surface of what this is about. Really, startups are about being able to learn and build solutions, frugal solutions around innovative ideas, when you're able to use almost non-conventional, sometimes even conventional approaches, technologies, ideas to deliver quickly, efficiently, you know. So there's that whole, the public sector is used to elaboration. So there's this whole reverse culture that needs to happen from a definition standpoint. There's need for political will. So we need Oswald. As much as he wants us to believe that we are him and he is us, you know, sometimes I say to him, that's not the case. So we need champions from the other side saying, guys, this is not how it works. This is how. So there needs to be the education that needs to happen within government about what this community is about. You know, with this work, I'm seeing increasing levels of understanding on what startups are. But we've taken it for granted. What really are they, you know? And so those are, within government, there are people who just wonder, even those people who walk around tech or ICT, what are these startups that you're saying? Yes, 2 guys with a PowerPoint presentation are also a startup. They also want to do it, you know. And so the thing is, there needs to be clarification on definition, some frame of what it means, how it also takes care of risks. I mean, it's not a willy-nilly model that doesn't have how to take care of risks, you know, and that's why you need things like sandboxes where you can test ideas, you can dimension risks and problems and deal with mitigants. You know, so the work really needs to go in, because what you're dealing with, really, in being able to understand upsides, is a cultural perspective that's come from years of reinforcing of what work is. Work is files, put together in those green strips. In fact, if I had my way, they'll ban those green strips that you put into files. Because, I mean, we need to move beyond. So that is work. You really need to move beyond memos and, you know, and things like that, and move to how do we deliver a public service that is leaning on a proven way to learn and implement. Really, that's what innovation is. A proven way to learn and implement, We will need to retool, and that's one of the things that the advocacy and the conversation around the startup bill is trying to do. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kasim. I'm going to throw Oswald on the spotlight now. And you've heard what Kasim said. So in my mind, I'm like, would we get to that point where there's a mindset change? But I want you to also answer it.
The answer is yes.
Okay.
But ultimately depends on the decisions we make today, right? And that's why, I keep harassing Kasim that, who's government? We are all government. Government is made up of Nigerian citizens. The practitioners and the people on the street and the markets are also Nigerian citizens. So it's critical that we understand that the government is us, and a lot of times the initiative and what needs to happen needs to be driven by us to get to the right place. So definitely, I think there'll be a mindset shift. And primarily, the reason why I say that is because we have no choice, right? We've started this conversation today by saying that we're dependent on hydrocarbons. Yeah. We know how the world feels about hydrocarbons. And we see the shift globally to the phrase now being data is the new oil, which is more so reality than a phrase. And it's critical that as a nation of 200 million people, 60%, we all know the stats, under 25, that we put in place infrastructure, we put in place policy that allows great ideas to thrive, right? I've long time said, or a friend of mine has actually said that in Nigeria, the idea of creating a startup from a garage doesn't exist, right? Because simply we don't have garages, right? So we need rules that work for us, right? What we have is a gateman and a gatehouse. You can't do your startup there because somebody already lives there. But I would love to see us get to a place where startups actually start from our villages, right? Where the idea was made by a guy who maybe worked in Lagos or worked in the startup in the main town in his state and goes back and sits in his village and comes up with an idea and runs from there, which will need us to have the right infrastructure in place, right? We have 4 to 5 unicorns now. It'd be great to see where we get to a place when we have 50 or 100. But more important than having 50 unicorns is having 1,000 companies that make a decent amount of money and hire 50 to 100 to 200 people and adding value, right? Regardless of being the $1 billion status, $1 million, 100 million naira, but it's actually creating jobs and creating value in the environment. So that's ultimately the goal that we're trying to achieve, right? But once again, this bill is just one of many things that will get us there.
Thank you so much, Oswald. My last question before I take 1 or 2 questions from the audience to be thrown at Adaeze and Nkechi. And it's how can startups be better sensitized on understanding that the government cannot be isolated from the ecosystem? I really like this question because I feel that that's what's happening today, right? When we see that, the government do not understand, or it's going to take a while, like Kasim has been saying, before the fight even gets to the right person, what we need. So you see the innovation ecosystem just backing out, and they're like, let government people stay. So I want to know, we'll start with Nkechi, and then Adaeze, you share your thoughts on that.
Okay. I think that's beginning to happen with everything that's been happening in Nigeria, and just even looking at the issue in Lagos where people with laptops and phones are being harassed and picked up. So founders are realizing that they need to find a way to engage with government because the environment seems very hostile to them. And even looking at regulation, look at what happened with Gokada after raising so much money and then having their business model just destroyed with just one simple thing that came in. So startups are beginning to realize that they do need to engage. But how to engage is the problem. What I've noticed is that for startups that are very early stage and are still building, they feel, let's just do this behind the curtain until we're big enough, then we'll find a way to engage. Because now that no one has looked for us, let's not now be the ones to carry ourselves to go and do that. But the good thing is lots of startups have grown. Now we have ones like Flutterwave, Paystack, and the rest that have gone ahead and have seen the need to actively engage with government. And in doing so, they are clearing the path for the other ones that are coming because they are actually building better pathway for them, better engagement with government so that the government understands the build of these startups. So I think that we're going to see more engagement from startups. The bigger players would obviously take the lead, but the smaller ones would also back with their voices and in just putting their opinions forward as well. As with this bill, it's a collaborative effort, but there are other very smaller players that their names are not on this, but they are backing, even if it's just by sharing information about the bill and things like that, but they are all in support. And that's why I know that more of this engagement is going to continue.
Thank you, Nkechi. Daisy?
So yeah, just echoing the same point on engaging, and just having, so we need to be able to be open enough on both sides to understand that we're all championing the same objective, at least. Again, the objective of regulation, I believe, is to promote innovation and economic growth and development and to protect the consumer. And the reason why it's important that everybody dialogues, because sometimes each party can be selfish, right? Startups want to just build businesses and be profitable, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? But you also have to understand that there are risks that you might not be paying attention to. On the other side, government is, enshrined with the sole purpose of protecting the consumer, making sure there are no security threats and all of that, but also can be sidelined by the benefits that come out from startups. So it's until everybody comes to the table to have a conversation with an open mind that we are all trying to achieve the same objective versus I just want to shut you up because you're government, I want to shut you up because you're youth. So if we have that mindset, then it sets the tone for how that conversation will go. Even during the NSB process, like we had to have everybody. There had to be an Oz from the presidency, an Ife, a Kasim, and Nkechi, different types of people having conversations. And were there disagreements or misunderstandings? Yes. But if we didn't continue to have conversations and trying to understand each other, we had to keep reiterating, we are working together to pass this bill, to work for the ecosystem. Having that as the North Star set the stage for resolving whatever misunderstanding quickly because we had this objective. So I think that's the best way to sensitize everyone to just continue having those kinds of conversations with an open mind towards a major objective. When there's division, then you can't get anywhere with the conversation. But once there's unity and a sense of purpose, then we should be able to come together to agree. Another way is supporting business associations. So you could get to a point where startups could say, oh, I want to spend more time with my startup. I might not have time to always go to government or be having dialogues. But I think there's now the growth of lobby groups and business associations that understand the policy climate, understand the language of government. And I think we need to start supporting those types of groups to stand on behalf of the startup ecosystem and engage government. And government has to be open to engaging those types of associations as well.
Thank you so much, Adaeze. I think one major take home from this is to have the kind of policies we want and favorable conditions for doing business. Each player has to put in the work. So it's not going to be business as usual, or it's government, or the ecosystem, but every player has to put in the work. Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Okay, please. I think you need to. Okay, can you hear her? Okay.
Thank you. So it's very exciting to see that the conversation has gotten this far and that all the stakeholders are involved, which I think is a very important part of the conversation. But listening to public opinion and people interacting about the bill, what happens after the bill is passed? Everybody's really scared of regulators in Nigeria for reasons you're probably very well aware of, which is that at the point of implementation, there's very often a power imbalance. Government can very easily implement, but then what happens to the startups is that every time there's a dispute, they're stuck in lengthy court processes to say, oh, I paid my licensing fees as requested, or I did what I was supposed to do, and now government is reneging. So are there thoughts around how do we maintain that equality within the position after the bill has been passed? How do we give, because if you're developing trust, then people have to know that at the end of the day, it's not going to be one startup against CBN, where CBN gets to say, I block your account. But then you want to fight back, and there's no Twitter anymore.
I'll take that question. Okay. It's a very, very important question, and it's one that the group has had to think about and respond to non-flippantly, because, your words would age, right? So I will say that, almost to the horror of Oswald, it's not a very ambitious bill, but it's a very critical bill. Because what it starts with, if you read, one of the key things in that bill is the council around innovation. Because what we're dealing with is even a policy incoherence. So the CBN says one thing, NIDA has a different idea, or so it appears to the ecosystem. And another Ministry of something has another idea. And if you talk to startups, one of the biggest challenges is just being able to have a stable, in fact, don't put us even in negative, just leave us at zero, right? So one of the most important tools in that bill, platforms, is where we can, by law, have people sit in a room to talk about the sort of instruments they're issuing out. I've been in government. Usually, when you're able to have that type of gathering, it's half done, because you would have to have conversations that are difficult, right? Because of sort of the people that will be in the room. Then another important thing the bill did was to democratically, first of its kind, have representation from the industry that is elected on a council, not appointed by some fiat. It is elected to represent a group following a very open process in itself. So you see, I'll tell you that why the bill is critical is that, first of all, it's able to have, it has provisions that says, silence, very important, don't mention it outside this room. If you pass a regulation without engaging council as it affects startup, it is effectively illegal. So it can be reversed. It can be reversed through a simple, for the lawyers in the room, if you have to go to court at all, a simple motion would have these reversed, because you are clearly in clear and flagrant disobedience of a law. So it's one of the, if you like, sort of silent things that makes the bill really critical. So a XYZ, I wouldn't call their name for fear of, but an XYZ organization would not unilaterally issue a regulation that destroys capital, business, opportunity for startups without having to discuss with the wider council and doing a proper cost-benefit, whatever analysis on it. And these are some of the critical, and there are a number of those type of important conversations that go on throughout the bill that make it effective, somewhat even easy. And it's not saying, look, the whole of Nigeria is becoming a startup nation tomorrow. No, that's not, I would have loved to see that in a bill. But you see, it is dealing with sort of the pertinent things. It is a bill that is for us, based on the challenges we have today. So I think that those kind of mechanisms are in the bill, and those are the things that, post the passage of the bill and the assent of the president, we would have to work together to ensure that this simple, there are a number of them, in the bill, just simple paragraphs and phrases, but they will go a long way in being able to guarantee the fact that the substance of the bill, is even being, and we don't annihilate consistently annihilate value from the ecosystem.
Okay, thank you.
Let me add to that.
Okay.
Yeah. So, my chairman Kasim has elaborately covered the mechanisms within the bill. Something that's not in the bill, but is definitely on the plan, is that we want to be able to template this bill in states, right? So, from our analysis, and in fact, when it hit us, it was really funny. We're solving a problem, but we see a bigger problem, in 36 places. So it became critical to start charting a path to getting this bill templated in states. So you now see NSB Kaduna, NSB Edo State, NSB Oyo is the idea. So that every state creates their own version based on their unique requirements, based on their unique tendencies to form a startup bill for that state. Because a lot of the issues that we may have with startups sometimes are affected at the state level. So I think, like I said a few minutes ago, this is just a starting point, right? This is not the last of the things that's required, but as Kasim has just stated, it's a critical component and a critical starting point to get into that vision that we've described earlier. And also critical is how the bill is operationalized, and that's also considered. But these are all bits of strategy that's not out in the open, but part of the plan as we execute them.
Okay, thank you so much, Oswald. We'll take one more question because of time, and then our esteemed panelists will give their last word. I can see, yes. So that will be our final question.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, good evening, and great input from the panel. My name is George, and I just want to make a quick comment and ask a question. Great spirit from what you guys are doing with the Nigerian Startup Bill. Very wonderful initiative. But I want to say that I'm afraid if the bill will not end up being more advisory than more in execution. So let me take example from what Kasim just said, that a regulator will not put out something without an engagement with a particular group of community. What is engagement? What do you define as engagement? So how would you tell a regulator that you haven't engaged before you put out this regulation? So it's enough reason for us to use emotions to strike it out, right? How ambiguous are those things in the bill? Or is it directly in the bill that so number of people or groups of people will sign off? So if you just say regulator must engage, that definition it might be struggle to prove it even in court where you want to strike it out. Yeah, setting up of councils. I mean, the presidency has the economic council, the one headed by Zidoin Salami and his group, for example. They put out a lot of things, public statements that are opposites of what the government does. So I'm just saying that how the bill is being written, we hope it doesn't become more advisory in nature, where most of the thing it does is makes positions and statements, but really can't move the hands of the guys that matters, the regulators, especially the big one in the house, the central something they call themselves. Yeah, thank you.
So, I mean, you asked, it's a good question, but it means that you need to attend more of our events, right, when we're engaging. Because what we did, it has an advisory role, it does, but critically, it has clear provisions that says that if it affects X, Y, Z, capital, operations, and one other thing, intellectual property, etc., of startups, then it has to be agreed by council. It's express. Sometimes you would expect that some rules are observed first in the breach, but society learns. Yesterday, we were reading a court judgment about how a circular is not a law. People learn, and people will have to learn. We're having conversations today in Nigeria about what is in the exclusive list and what is in the concurrent list, and whether you can tax X, Y, Z. And you can see some fidgeting around. Because when you look at the law, sometimes society goes through a process. But it's important to have these stopgap measures and these ideas in the law. And so what the law has done is expressly require that certain things are either approved expressly by council. There's a whole method in administrative law for that kind of approval. So it is, some aspects of the bill is not merely advisory. It raises legal questions and effect. Do I think that miraculously, some of the people you allude to, I don't know them, I'm not sure who you mentioned, but some of the people you allude to may not go ahead and do certain things. I mean, it would be fantastic to say that they wouldn't. But I'll say that they will now have an opportunity to learn, because we're seeing the increasing advent of public interest litigations, and we're seeing some of them already, you know. And sometimes we need to trust the process, you see. Some will learn quickly, some will learn slower, you know, when there are a few reversals and so on. So in my view, I think that no one denies the fact that we have an uphill challenge. We do have one. But I think that there is enough in the bill to mean that we can start having some of those frank conversations. I mean, it's a journey, right? You know, it's a journey. But we're starting from a point and addressing, you know, certain questions. I mean, attend our next event. I'll be happy to welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
On Friday, so online. If you go to startupbill.ng on Instagram or LinkedIn, you should get the link. I think you should join.
So yes, I believe you will join the next event. Okay, I would like each panelist to give us their final words. I'm sorry we could not take any more questions because of time, but as I said, you can follow Nigerian Startup Bill on all social media platforms and actually follow the conversation.
Last comment?
Yeah, last remarks.
Thank you very much for my last comment is, I believe that in building the future of Nigeria or of anything, we need to start from a place of optimism, in actually believing that we can create a better future. And I know there's a lot of negativity around when you think about Nigeria and where the country is at the moment, but I want us to get to a point where we believe that truly our actions and even this bill can, in fact, make a dent in what we're currently experiencing.
Thank you, Nkechi. Oswald?
Yeah, that was perfect, you know, saying optimism. Because, I mean, when I make my comment that tends to make people go, what? About who's the government, it speaks to the fact that as a citizen, simple things like supporting something you've read or you believe is a good idea is a good way to contribute to governance, right? So the support of the bill, you know, sharing information about the bill, discussing the bill, is a good way to actually push forward the objectives of what the bill is trying to achieve, right? I think a lot of times we're not as optimistic. We tend to dwell in pessimism, and that actually yields the results that we don't want, right? So what we actually call, and as has been said on the panel, this is a model to see how can we collaborate together to create legislature that helps us, right? Us. I'm in government, but I'm a citizen of Nigeria as well, right? And we're all citizens of Nigeria. And ultimately, we need to be able to collaborate and support what we believe are good ideas.
Thank you. Collaborate. That's a good one.
Yeah, I'm echoing the same thoughts of optimism. I know that there are concerns, and understandably so, right? But I also remember when we were starting this process, and that was the first thing that we had to bear in mind. But we also bore in mind the fact that if we don't do this, nobody would. And just echoing Oz's point on who government is. Oz is government, as we define it, right? And I wish there was a way we had documentaries of all the times, or video clips of all the times we've been working. I haven't seen so much passion and determination. You see that from one government official, and you're like, yes, there is hope. Recently, we heard the Honorable Minister of Communications and Digital Economy speak passionately at the Nigerian Economic Summit Group pre-summit about his hopes for this bill, clearly understanding the value that startups have for the economy and how he's willing to pour in as much support into seeing this through. That gives hope, right? We had the Minister of Finance even acknowledge that sometimes government doesn't know what to do. And so they are counting on all of us that have an idea of the best path to have conversations. Even if the bill doesn't pass, we believe it will pass, and we are working hard for it to pass. But we believe that there's still success because everybody came together with shared determination to even produce a bill. This is not the first time a bill was being talked about, by the way, in Nigeria. There have been talks about bills and nothing happened until now because we had willpower from all sides. So we just need to maintain that momentum. We don't give up. If it doesn't work the first time, we'll try again. So it's that hope that keeps us alive. It's that hope that makes us achieve the dreams that we want. So let's stay optimistic.
Thank you. And Kasim.
Thank you very much. You've been a great audience. The message is optimism, hope, determination. I wouldn't say more. Thank you for the session. Thoroughly enjoyed myself. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's session. We believe you will join the conversations you join the conversations online. And just like we're saying, optimism is just how we're going to move forward. Thank you.